What's good everybody, this is CP and welcome to a very special video. Today I'm going to talk about expectations for every NHL team in the Pacific Division for the 2022-23 NHL season. And before I deep dive into the teams and go into the juicy details, I'm going to quickly break down the tiers and roughly describe what each category means. For the first tier, we have Hunt for Stanley. Basically, it means that teams in this tier should be considered a contender in their division, and the ultimate goal should be hunting for the Stanley Cup. In fact, anything less than a third round appearance should be considered a huge disappointment. The next tier, we have shorter golf season. Basically, for teams in this particular category, they should be good enough to be a playoff team. Maybe not win the cup or go on a super deep run, but a round or two in the playoffs could be very possible. Besides that, they should still have enough time to enjoy most of the off season by a slightly shortened season on the golf course. The next tier I have is the Dark Horse tier. This tier is perhaps the most interesting with the biggest question marks in the division. It will mainly consist of teams with the ability to surprise or overachieve, but at the same time they might tease and disappoint fans by just barely missing the playoffs. The next tier we have is Ponder for Connor. So for teams that fall in the Ponder for Connor tier, if things go south, I think it might be worthwhile for them to ponder for Connor, aka tank for Connor Bedard in the 2023 NHL draft. Because from what many say, Bedard is that next guy, and opportunities like this come around once in a blue moon. So in short, the juice might be worth the squeeze for Connor Bedard in next year's draft. Now, to make things more fun and random, I'm going to bring in my low quality Pacific Division wheel and let it decide which teams I should talk about. So let's get that wheel spinning here. First up, let's go down to Sin City and talk about the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, from what we saw late last year and the off-season activity they've made so far, I currently have this team in the Dark Horse division. In my opinion, we'll have to wait and see what team we get from them this upcoming season. To me, it's either a bounce back year or another fallback year where they get slightly worse than last year. As a certified armchair GM right now, I can't exactly tell you where this team is trending. They missed the playoffs last year for the first time in franchise history. In my opinion, this team is currently caught in a little bit of a precarious position. Will they continue to trend downwards into mediocrity, or will Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, and friends bounce back and put this team on the map again as a packed division contender? I don't know. We'll see. However, a few things I'll point out is that they were pretty aggressive the past few years and went after some very big names and gave them very big contracts, bringing in guys like Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, and Alex Pietrangelo. From afar, I'm not sure if the current core is the right mix and has the right chemistry to be as dominant as the teams they had back in the 2017 to 2019 era. We have also seen some consistent major turnovers with this team, and this summer we pretty much saw McCrimmon dump even more salary. He pretty much gave away Max Pacioretty for nothing and traded another legit top 6 scorer in Evgeny Dadonov for Shea Weber's contract. So if you do the math, that's almost 40 goals taken away from last year's roster. Another potential issue I see with this team is their goaltending. To be completely honest, I'm not sure if Robin Leonard is the guy. And I know hindsight is 2020, but many Golden Knight fans would probably argue that getting rid of Fleury might have been the wrong move after all. However, I must say that their defense is still pretty good. And if they play up to par, a top 4 led by Pietrangelo, Theodore, and Martinez should help them win some games. Better yet, I think their defense alone can keep them in a lot of games, and for that reason, I have a hard time seeing them be a bottom 3 team in this division. So right now, I'll keep them in a Dark Horse tier, because I'm not entirely sure if they'll bounce back or continue to fall off this upcoming season. How about you? Which way do you see the Vegas Golden Knights trending? Next up, let's spin that wheel. And there we go. So we'll go down to SoCal and take a look at the Los Angeles Kings. Now, I might ruffle some feathers here, but I'm going to go bold and put the Kings in the shorter golf season tier. So the second highest tier in my rankings. AKA, I see them as a top 3 team in the Pacific Division, with upside to go 2 rounds in the playoffs. Despite rostering quite a few inexperienced players last year, along with some major injuries, they finished top 3 in the Pac Division and pushed the Edmonton Oilers to Game 7. Especially in the playoffs, they did all that with their number 1 defenseman Drew Doughty out, and they also didn't have Victor Arvidsson in the lineup, who is a legit top 6 60-point guy. Now, on paper, to me, they have a pretty good mix of young and experienced players. Two things I like about this roster is one, the upside they have with their younger guys. If they continue to develop well, I see players like Quinton Byfield, Sean Durzi, and Michael Anderson overall continue to grow into major contributors, basically to help improve this team that much more. Meanwhile, a high-end prospect like Alex Turcotte might be ready to come in and make the show very soon. This pretty much gives the Kings another weapon up front, which never hurts. Besides that, they have several players around the 25 to 30 year old range in their prime, including Philip Danault, Adrian Kempe, Victor Arvidsson, Alex Iafallo, Kevin Fiala, and Cal Peterson in net. So I think that core alone should make them a very competitive team. Finally, they still have a few key older pieces like Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, who honestly are probably on the back nine of their careers, but are still very serviceable players at this point, and does not need to be elite to help this team win. In my opinion, the LA Kings are a sneaky good team in this division. And no, they don't have a legit superstar or a top 5 player like McDavid or Draisaitl on their roster, but I feel like they're a deep, well-balanced team that could do some damage. So overall, I could see them once again be a playoff team. And if their young guys could step up and take a step forward, then it might give them enough firepower to go further than one round in the playoffs next year. How about you? What do you think of the Kings heading into next season? Next up, let's take the wheel for a spin. Looks like we're going to Disneyland. So let's take a look at the Anaheim Ducks. Comparing the Ducks to the other teams, I still think they are not there yet this year. And to be completely honest, it might be another year or two of rebuilding until we see them take the next step forward. So with that in mind, I'm going to put them in the ponder for Connor tier. So yes, this is the first team in this tier. Because based on last year overall, it was a very disappointing season. The Ducks finished second last in the Pacific with a sub 500 record. They had a somewhat busy offseason, but not too many big changes. Obviously, one of the biggest changes was Ryan Getzlaf retiring. Congrats to him for an amazing career. And besides that, they made a few splash in free agency, landing Ryan Strome and defenseman John Klingberg. But I'm not convinced adding Strome and Klingberg will make them that much better. Nonetheless, they're probably still good veterans for the team to have to help groom the kids. In terms of potential, the Ducks do have some very nice young pieces, including Trevor Zegras, Troy Terry, Mason McTavish, and Jamie Drysdale. The important thing to point out here is that 3 of those guys are still very young and barely 21 years old. So I feel like they might still be at least 2 years away from being able to compete against the big dogs like McDavid or Draisaitl in their division. So unless the Ducks play out of their minds and overachieve, I feel like the Ducks should be a bottom 3 team again in the Pacific Division. And to be quite honest, there's no real reason for the GM to go all in and make bigger moves this year. If we're thinking long term, it might be more beneficial for them to try to shoot for another high draft pick. And if they do land a guy like Connor Bedard and add him to the young core they already have, it might be game over, not only for the rest of the Pacific Division, but maybe for the Western Conference. Once again, I have the Ducks in the ponder for Connor tier heading to the 2022-23 NHL season. Moving on, let's see who we get next. So we're moving up to the Bay Area to talk about the San Jose Sharks. Personally, I'm not very high on this team either, so I'll probably throw them in the ponder for Connor tier as well. The Sharks were in a great team last year and finished 3rd last in the division. No lie, but this team has been free-falling badly for the past 3 seasons. Still with big money locked up on depreciating assets like Erik Karlsson and Marc-Edouard Vlasic on D, along with 5 more years committed to a 33-year-old Logan Couture at $8 million per. I think it'll be very hard for the Sharks to stay competitive here for the next few years at least. Also, losing another core player like Brent Burns over the summer will hurt the defense a bit on the blue line, I feel like. And just looking at the roster, I would say that they might be heading in the opposite direction in comparison to teams like the Anaheim Ducks and the LA Kings. And Shark fans, don't hate me for this, but I would be really surprised if they're not a bottom 3 team in the Pacific Division again next season. They're clearly trying to rebuild and bring in some youth into the roster, but they're getting held back by these big contracts committed to their veterans. And just by looking at the roster, I'm not sure if they have one true legit superstar they can build around. Don't get me wrong, Timo Meier and Tomas Hertl are decent guys to have around, but maybe not superstar potential that can make them a cup contender. So ponder for Connor might not be a bad idea. What do you think? Comment below. Next up, we have the Seattle Kraken. I personally think this is going to be a very interesting year for fans down in Seattle. And yes, I have them in the ponder for Connor tier for now, but things can change real quick, and just hear me out here. They made some very nice moves over the summer, adding guys like Andrei Burakovsky, Oliver Borkstrand, and Justin Schultz. Not only do these moves give the team a little more depth, but I also expect to see some improvements offensively as well. Another major turning point for the Kraken this summer was adding a prospect like Shane Wright, who literally fell to their lap at number 4 at the NHL entry draft. I honestly think this kid can be special, and it's crazy that Seattle might have gotten their future franchise player in only their second year. Not bad for an expansion team if you ask me. The two biggest question marks for me is whether their offense is good enough to compete with elite teams in the West like Edmonton, Colorado, and so on. We all know that they had problems scoring last year. They got some help offensively, but they still might need a little more to be able to compete with the big boys in this division, I feel like. Another potential issue I see with this team is their defense. On paper, they look okay, but they weren't good on the ice at all last year. So without any huge upgrades, I'm not sure if the decor is good enough to keep the puck out of the net on most nights. Overall, in my books, Seattle has potential to be one of the most improved teams in this division, and who knows, maybe by the end of the year they will jump into the dark horse tier. However, I'll have to see it to believe it. So as of now, I still have them in the ponder for Connor tier. And for Seattle fans, it's still early, so it might not be a bad idea to be horrible for one more year. Cause can you imagine if they land Connor Bedard and given the luxury to build a team around Shane Wright and Bedard for the next 8 years? No cap, that would be a nasty combo. And it could be something special that not only breaks this division apart, but perhaps even the Western Conference in the next 5 to 8 years. Yeah, so Seattle fans shouldn't lose hope, and like I said before, being in the ponder for Connor tier for one more year might actually be a blessing in disguise. What do you think about the Kraken heading into this year? Comment below. So next up, looks like we'll be going up north to beautiful British Columbia to talk about the Vancouver Canucks. Let's see here. Some of you might disagree, but I'm gonna put the Canucks in the dark horse tier. Yes, I'm somewhat bullish on the Canucks this year. The main reason is because they made a few nice moves this offseason and also have a few young players on the roster like Pettersson, Hughes, Podkolzin, and now Hooklander, who will likely all continue to get better. By the way, I made a video deep diving into the Canucks' major moves this summer, so make sure you check that one out later. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty juicy. Anyways, if we look at the Canucks roster, their offense is low-key stacked in my opinion. I would argue that they might have one of the deepest forward groups in the division. On the other hand, let's keep it real. Defense might be their weakness though. Yes, they have Hughes and Ekman-Larsson on the left side, but the right side, I feel like they could definitely use an upgrade. In any case, if the Canucks play like the way they did under Boudreau in the second half of the season last year, I feel like they could definitely do some damage. And who knows, they might have a legit shot to make the playoffs or be very close at least. If they do get in though, then they'll probably screw someone over like the LA Kings or even the Vegas Golden Knights. Personally, I would be on the lookout for the Vancouver Canucks, as I feel like they could be one of the biggest dark horse in the Pacific Division next season. Next up, looks like we will go to oil country to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. This one might be very obvious, but after making it all the way to the third round last year, I feel like Edmonton should be considered the top team of this division heading into next season. Therefore, I have no choice but to put them in the hunt for Stanley tier. It took a minute, but I feel like it's go time for the Oilers right now. They have two of the best players in the world in their prime in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And after a few years, they finally had some cap space flexibility to actually put together a pretty decent core around the team. Might not be Colorado good, but I feel like they're very close to being championship caliber, especially if they could find some more upgrades on the defense. By the way, I also did an in-depth video talking about the Oilers on other topics, so if you're into the Oilers, make sure you check those ones out as well, because I'm not gonna lie, they're pretty good. With their main core in McDavid, Draisaitl, and Darnell Nurse around the age of 25 to 28, along with other complementary players like Evander Kane, Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and now Jack Campbell, all in their late 20s to early 30s, I feel like anything less than a third round appearance might be considered a disappointment at this point. Let's face it, Draisaitl's contract is up in 3 years, McDavid's in 4. And seeing how things went down in Calgary this summer, you just never know what's gonna happen in the off season. So I feel like Uncle Ken Holland and friends should really put the pedal to the metal and go for it. Once again, it's hunt for Stanley or nothing in Edmonton for me. Next up, we will head down to the Red Mile and look at the Calgary Flames. Wow, crazy off season to say the least. If you missed it or want to relive it and catch up on everything, make sure you check out my Flames video after, and you already know it's a juicy one for sure. Anyways, this is a tricky one here, but if I had to choose, I'll probably put the Flames in the shorter golf season tier. So in that, I still expect them to be a playoff team, because besides the crazy trades that went down, if we look at their roster, I still feel like Calgary has a decent team. Maybe not cup contending good, but should still see at least a round or two in the playoffs. Now, no doubt their defense probably got a little bit better with the Tkachuk trade with the addition of Mackenzie Weegar. On the other hand, their offense isn't bad as well, because they did get a major piece back in Huberdeau. So hypothetically speaking, let's say Huberdeau replaces Johnny Gaudreau as their new playmaker and 100-point guy. The Flames still haven't found anyone to replace Tkachuk's 42 goals and 104 points. To be quite frank, I'm not sure if they can with the market they have right now in terms of free agents or trades, so it might be tough for them to have the year they had last year and win the division again. And unless Tree Living decides to blow things up and trade away a few major key roster players, I really have a hard time seeing the Calgary Flames miss the playoffs with the current roster they have. Especially if Sutter is still behind the bench, he's probably not going to let it happen. So for me, shorter golf season tier it is for the Calgary Flames. Do you agree or disagree with everything I said in this video? Make sure you let me know in the comments below. And if you like, feel free to call me out as well. If you want to watch more of my crappy videos, then make sure you click the links on the side right here.